Hello, good afternoon. Buenas tardes, everyone. This is Jose. So glad you can join us today. I'm so thrilled to be part of this conversation and to just really listen to powerful voices in this panel on racial and gender equity. So thrilled that this is part of the agenda and program for everyone. What are ways that you have felt limited by your gender and or ethnicity or both? What are ways that you have felt limited and or empowered by your gender and or ethnicity and can both be working simultaneously?
I think for me, I felt both empowered and disempowered. Growing up, I always felt like an outsider in school. I was always like the only Black kid or one of a few. And that like was all the way through high school. So in high school, I got called the N-word and the person that called it faced little repercussions. And it was also apparent that my school administration really didn't care. Um, and spend a lot of time protecting the girl. So it made me feel belittled and that my comfort and safety really didn't matter. But I think also it empowered me to create change. So I created the BSU at my school and I wanted to create like a special place for people who were marginalized at my school.
Victoria, so you have some thoughts?
Yeah, so I personally felt very limited by my gender, particularly in school and in male-dominated fields. So, for instance, at my school, I'm typically one of two girls, if not the only girl, who partakes in our engineering and debate clubs. And I feel that these sort of situations can genuinely produce a sense of placelessness for many girls as they feel excluded and ultimately discouraged. From like male dominated fields and fields dominated by white people as well. And I think that I speak for a lot of girls and other oppressed peoples when I say that um, oftentimes when we speak out about an issue that we're passionate about or voice our opinions, especially in school and other social environments, we're often like mocked, doubted, disregarded. Meanwhile, our male counterparts are praised. But on the other hand, I do feel empowered because as a competitive person, I do sort of want to challenge those gender norms. And for instance, I started my school's Girls Who Code Club to sort of tie into that.
Wow, again, Victoria, great example of you see something, it's playing in a way that isn't feeling empowering, but you turn it around. Joyce, you have some thoughts about this?
Yeah. In my personal experience, I think the limitations that I've felt have been more internalized in the form of like insecurities or like the self-imposed restriction. And I think that stems from this societal expectation that like people like me who are like young Asian American women should be docile and meek and submissive. And I think at first I kind of succumbed to it because I didn't know how to advocate for myself. But as I'm learning to like take more pride in my identity, I'm realizing that like I can do whatever I want and like I'm going to make my own place and open my own doors. So I'm still in this process of kind of combating that internalized limitation, but also gaining consciousness and confidence of how I can define my own place.
Thank you, Joyce. And Tomiko.
I think that something that people need to realize is that Black women face oppression on both sides for being a woman, but for also being a Black individual. This double oppression translates into stereotypes such as the angry Black woman or hypersexualizing Black women. In the classroom, especially in non-Black spaces, it feels like you always have to constantly prove yourself. And I remember when I was signing up for an academic program at my school, which is full of honors and AP classes. And there were white students in front of me who were kind of shocked that I was going to be taking these courses, which is disheartening because I've taken classes, the smart people classes with them as well. And my supervisor, I asked him if I got straight A's, would it mean that I had a 4.7 GPA? And he said that, yes, you would get that 4.7 GPA, but it's going to be very difficult. And he wasn't really encouraging me to get those straight A's. I definitely obtained those straight A's, but just to be not encouraged by supervisors is an issue. I talked to my friends about it, and they were saying that like Black students are very underestimated in the school system, and that needs to change.
Wow. So when we think about the response from, I want to pose one of the essential questions that in the United States we're struggling with, if not globally, is 2008, as I mentioned, Barack Obama gets elected, and it's like, that's it, right? We arrived. Now 2020, we elect the first woman, Black, South Asian woman to be vice president. So this question of that your generation, right, is do you consider your generation to be post-racial or post-gender now that we've elected people to the top echelons of our elected officials? Are we in a post-racial, post-gendered society now? So Shripada.
Thank you. I believe that our generation is not yet completely post-racial, but our Gen Z community is striving towards that goal. More young people in this generation are fighting towards the improvement of racial and gender equity. And I think media has played a major role in this. In bringing awareness to people of this generation. For example, the Black Lives Matter movement, it was received well among some citizens of this nation, but it was also not received well by many others. So what that shows us is a lot of people are getting aware that, okay, there are these problems that exist, but then a lot of people don't agree with that. And based on a survey conducted by the Tala community in September of 2020, it was full of more than 5,000 Gen Z students. More than half of the survey respondents said that they've witnessed a discrimination at a workplace or at their school based on sexual orientation or their race, and things like that. So what that clearly shows us is we're not post-racial, but we understand that this is a problem that we need to fix.
All right. Yes, so the role of media is very critical. Tomiko.
No, I do not think that our generation is post-racial. There are many racist people in my generation because of the generational racist beliefs that they have been taught from their parents or family. Although I think that my generation is definitely more progressive and open-minded, open to unlearning the traditional values that we have been taught. And I've also been able to see people in my generation start to speak up to their parents about social issues and trying to educate their families about things that they just don't understand. So I believe that my generation can definitely make change for the better.
Joyce, you had some thoughts to share?
Yeah, I think I agree with everybody else. I don't think our generation is post-racial. And even just looking at the group of people who do support, like, Black Lives Matter and movements like that, like so much of it has become performative. Like the Black Lives Matter was like somewhat of a trend with like the hashtags and like Blackout Tuesday, things like that. And so it's become a little bit harder to parse out like the sincerity in people's actions and like whether we really are addressing like racial justice. And then on top of that, there's like, generational gaps and like media portrayal of like these movements and what people are doing.
Thank you, Joyce. And Elise, you have some thoughts?
Yeah, adding on to what Joyce said, I really do not believe that we are in a post-racial generation. I think we're making a lot of strides and it's going to be better, but I do believe that a lot of activism is performative and a lot of people do it based off how it'll make them look as opposed to like doing the right thing. I also think things like implicit bias are something that affects a lot of people and that a lot of people aren't even aware of that they contribute to or that they have a bias against a certain group of people. So yeah.
What Ta-Nehisi Coates often refers to, we're in a rhetorical post-racial space, but certainly not fully or in a post-gendered space. So with that, I do want to bring in I'm thrilled to actually bring in an external questioner here to ask a question to you all. I'm thrilled to have our own local Orange County product, former quarterback at USC and in the NFL, Mark Sanchez. He has a question for you all on this topic. So we'll have Mark ask his question.
Social media obviously has its drawbacks. What positive influences can social media have?
Great question by Mark Sanchez. We often think about other parts of social media. What are the positive impacts that social media can have on this topic, this work? Go ahead, Elise. Or I'm sorry, Shuprata.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Thank you. So we all know that we live in a male-dominated society, and this inequality with gender would continue to exist as long as there are barriers for women, be it social, economic, political, or emotional. So I think social media helps to break down these barriers because it provides an open channel where women who are harassed or abused, they can voice their issues without any fear. So this encourages women to also be a breadwinner in their house. And similarly, social media also has its share in trying to restore racial inequalities because we call our nation to respect its constitution, but unfortunately, we don't really do that. We still see actions of injustices still happening to people of minority communities. For example, in the past, we had media like radio and television. They were used to bring awareness to people, but they were all one-way communication. Social media creates multi-way communication that's so powerful, and it helps to capture the thoughts of so many people to fight against this racial injustice. So I think that us living in a democratic nation, the voice of people means a lot to influence equity, and I think social media captures that really well.
Wow. Thank you, Shuprata. Elise, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
It's okay. So information and knowledge are power, and media, specifically social media, provides platforms for sharing vital information that may not be covered on the news or popular networks. So it also shows people that they are not alone and that our suffering is not in vain. For instance, the video of George Floyd, we watched a man get murdered by the police. This really impacted the nation because we saw it with our two eyes and we did not just read about it. I think that social media provides a gateway for people who may not see racism within their, like in their neighborhood, but it shows that it's very much so real and impacts communities.
Thank you, Elise. So democratization of media, as Shuprata mentioned. Joyce.
Yeah, I completely agree with Shuprata and Elise. And I just want to add, like, in terms of advocacy, like in the audience that social media is able to reach, it's kind of like this virtual crowd because everybody's congregated to like this one platform. And so you're not limited to the people just in your vicinity. You have like a diversity within your audience and within the people who are seeing the content you put out. And so it's a way to gain traction for a cause that you're passionate about, or like spark movements like George Floyd, like the video, all that started online, and also just spread awareness and educate other people.
Thank you, Joyce. Victoria, you had some thoughts on this.
Yeah, so just want to reiterate what Elise and Shuprata said. Social media definitely does have a variety of positive uses. For many people, it helps them connect and provide a community with people who are just like them and have the same background or similar experiences. And it's also really been a gateway to promote several racial and gender equity movements, such as the Black Lives Matter movement, the feminist movement, and so on. In particular, last summer, for the Black Lives Matter movement, a lot of my peers and students from schools in my area were able to get together and organize protests and rallies, as well as fundraisers for Black Lives Matter, all via social media. So it definitely serves as a positive sort of gateway for social change and awareness.
So allowing this community conversation in a broader way. Tobiko.
Social media definitely spreads awareness for social justice issues such as the Black Lives Matter movement. it opened the eyes of many people in this country, but also globally. The Black Lives Matter movement was something that was global, which was very inspiring to see that the people can really come together and make change. I feel like social media also shows the people's perspective instead of what media is going to tell you. For example, on social media, you are able to see what the protesters are going through, and in the news outlets, the protesters were usually called like thugs or criminals, but on the social media side, you're able to see what they're actually fighting for, and you're able to share your own story and perspective.
I wonder, I think you all have talked eloquently about the power of social media to construct positive and relational social change. But we hear so much about how it actually has also allowed negative elements that might go counter to that social change also rise, right? There's of hate and finding other hateful communities to then create conspiracies and all these things. What are your thoughts about that? How are you all thinking about how social media will be used in this negative way for divisiveness and isolationism? Go ahead, Victoria. I'm sorry.
So I think that is sort of a difficult topic because it begs the question of free speech versus spreading hate and violence. And obviously, I think that ultimately Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, social media platforms are private institutions, and they sort of have a social responsibility to be providing information that's accurate and that doesn't incite violence. So that's sort of how I view the issue.
That's the struggle, right? Free speech in this country of freedom. At what point does it cross the line? So we'll go on along those lines to a second question by Mark Sanchez, a question that I'm really interested in your answers to, being a father of four young women in my life. So we'll go on with Mark with his second question that he has for you all.
How do we encourage men to champion women's rights?
Boom. How do we do it? What do we need to do? How do we best get it done? So who'd like to take a shot at that question that Mark posed to us?
I think we need to teach men not to objectify us. I feel like all women, no matter what your race or ethnicity is, we all get, objectified. So I think that once people stop seeing women as objects and more as people who have thoughts, feelings, emotions, and who have ambition, just like men, then I think that's a way that we can champion men to start seeing us not just as equals, but also to give us like equity so we can have the same opportunities as them.
That's right. Thank you, Elise. Well said. Joyce.
Yeah, and I think it's also about just holding conversations, because when you like term it as like women's rights, it feels exclusive to men, but that's not the case at all. And it's about like equal gender, like gender equality and equity. And so including them in the conversations that we're having, and also framing it not as like a woman versus men or like a us versus them thing, but making it inclusive and like promoting empathy among people. I think that'll allow like all genders to like see the importance of gender equity and be included in the movement.
All right, it looks like we're gonna have to wrap up. I know Victoria, Tomiko, you had something to say on this one, but it looks like we're at time. But I think we'll close there with this last idea of empathy, right? Whenever we talk about equity, bottom line, it's about being empathetic to others. As many of you said, if you have enough food, be empathetic to others do not. If you have the candy, be empathetic to others who do not. And recognize the history of that, right? How history informs our current conditions. And if not, we're condemned to repeat history, as so many have reminded us. So thank you all for this incredibly powerful set of ideas, perspectives, and for all of your successes and the continued plights that you'll continue to struggle with. But I think I'm thrilled. I'm thrilled that your generation identifies what it means to be post-racial and what it means not to be, as well as how gender and the role that men must play in that role. As together through faith, love, and humility, we can create that empathetic society we're all striving for. So thank you all for your incredible success in your work today, and to all those who helped organize this panel and brought us all together in this moment to discuss this incredibly important topic.